Everybody, and welcome to the first meeting of the Rock Garden Society for this year. I think we have a wonderful program. I hope you will join our local chapter if you're not already a member. We have two speakers, one in November and one in March. We'll be giving two talks on Saturday rather than the standard one. The one in November we'll be giving a talk on bulbs in the garden, and another one on rock gardens he's seen around the world. He's the NARG's traveling speaker from Scotland. The speaker in March will be a fellow from Colorado who will be giving a talk on traveling in the Caucasus, plant hunting in the Caucasus. And then he'll be giving a demonstration on installing a crevice garden. That's a Czech-style garden where the rocks are upright. He'll be demonstrating that. Where is it going to be done, Tim? I'm not sure. Somewhere.
Up in R23. It's that up here.
Okay.
Going out of
so look at your calendars and mark it on your calendars and be sure to come to that. Anyway, our speaker this morning is Adrienne Roethling, a native of Rochester, New York. She's a graduate of the Longwood Gardens Professional Training Program at the University of Delaware. She graduated in 2000, and after that took a job with Plant Delight's Nursery in Tonyhaven, where she was the garden curator. She then joined the Paul Ciener Botanical Garden in Kernersville as garden curator, where she manages horticultural activities and is also the garden nursery too. Adrienne also serves on the board of Kernersville Tree Commission and has been the past president of the Guilford County Horticultural Society. She's here today to tell us about Xeric Scree Gardens. Please welcome Adrienne Roethling.
Thank you, Bobby. This is homecoming to me. Most of you know John. John worked here for many, many years. We've been away for 5 years now. Maybe not many, many years, sorry. We actually met at Plant Delight's Nursery. A lot of people don't know that. I came in as Tony's curator in 2000, and John was one of my assistants, and we were married, and he still is one of my assistants. And it's a great setup. Todd, most of you know Todd the Sane. He's the one that recruited me to come and interview for the curator job at the Paul J. Ciener Botanical Garden. That's where he went after he left this institution. And now Todd is in Oklahoma. So I'm not going to Oklahoma. I don't think John wants to go to Oklahoma either. For those of you who don't know about, if you don't mind, just let me give you just a quick spiel about Paul J. Ciener Botanical Garden. Mr. Ciener was a local businessman in Kernersville. He was actually born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, moved to Florida for a little while, and then finished his life in Kernersville. He was diagnosed with cancer in August of '98 and died in October of '98. During that 3-month period, he told his sons he would love to build a garden in his honor. He had such a wonderful life in Kernersville, and he wanted to give something back. So he left an endowment to get the garden started. The endowment helped purchase the 7-acre site, which is in the historic district of downtown Kernersville. A lot of people don't know this, but Paul Ciener actually started Piedmont, Carolina Nursery. What's interesting is Paul Ciener, PC, Piedmont, Carolina, PC. So he branded that PC term. Paul Ciener also had Ciener Woods Ford, which is a Ford dealership, which has now been brought up by Crossroads from Cary. And then he also had PCI Builders, again, playing off the letters PC. When he died, Mark Peters took over the nursery. Mark Peters was a longtime nursery manager of at least 20 years. His brother, Miles, also bought out the establishment after Paul died, as well as Chip Calloway, who is the designer for the Piedmont, Carolina Nursery. Mark serves on our board. He is really good friends with David and Greg, who are the two sons. David took over the car dealership, but now he has a car care maintenance shop after Crossroads bought it out, and then Greg took over the construction side. Paul Ciener had PCI Builders, so Greg took over that. Greg was our lead builder for our event center. If you haven't been, it's a wonderful event center. We have we have a wedding today, actually. Lots of weddings, lots of events. We are a botanical garden first, though. Events, obviously, it's good to make money, so you know we want to do that too. We have a wonderful event center. We have 2 acres currently finished of the 7 acres. We have over 1,300 plants in the garden currently. We have a wonderful perennial border that was designed by Chip Calloway, Doug Ruin and Edith Edelman, locals here in Durham. Chip Calloway designed a couple other garden aspects, and then of course the staff, myself included, has designed pretty much the rest of the 2 acres. And we have it all planned out. Robert Hyder, an alum from NC State, did our architect, all our layout for the entire 7-acre garden. So we have a lot going on. I know the group has been to visit maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I forget when you all came to visit.
About 3.
Okay, it's 3 years. It's changed since then. Our welcome center is done. The Xeric Scree gardens have, of course, flourished, and I'm going to show you that today. So you guys will be in for a treat, just the little snippets that I'm going to show of the Xeric Scree gardens, and I encourage you all to come out and visit sometime. Please come back. Thank you for letting me do that. So the Xeric Scree gardens, any guesses where that name could have possibly come from? Thank you. Yes, Todd. Todd came up with the word Xeric Scree. You know, working for Tony Avent, he had the Scree gardens there and the southwestern gardens, and so Todd came up with the term Xeric Scree. We absolutely love that. Xeric meaning dry, arid conditions, and the Scree meaning slightly raised, so you can't see the other side of the garden. You actually have to physically walk around the entire side of the garden just to see it. And then, of course, we mulched it with permatill, which also aids in the drainage, of course, and then the Scree part of it. So before I explore our Xeric Scree gardens, I want to show you how I got there. And John and I go back and forth. He teases me about this because I'm from the north, as you all heard, Rochester, New York, where I didn't really grow cacti or hardy succulents at all. Maybe some sedums and hens and chicks, and that was about it. And that was pretty much all I knew when it came to cactus. So I did a lot of plant exploration. Obviously, this is taken in California. We can't grow like they do in California, but you know, you get a little inspiration. My first experience with cacti and hardy succulents is here, where I went to school for 2 years. Everybody notice where this is growing? In a greenhouse. In a greenhouse, under glass. John and I tease each other because John goes, "Where did you first see your first agave?" And I said, "Longwood Gardens in Pennsylvania." Under glass. So everything that I knew about hardy cacti were grown under glass. Lots of wonderful boulders, cute little succulents all growing throughout the conservatory there. I mean, I just absolutely loved it. I fell in love with cactus gardening, and I just was thrilled when I came down to North Carolina finally and saw all these wonderful plants growing outdoors. But, you know, it was a good teaser for me to grow these plants and knowing where they can grow in addition to where they can't grow outside. So, they were clever and put them inside. This is the rock garden here at Longwood Gardens. It's right next to the East Conservatory. It's a very large room, probably the size of this room here. So it's got quite an extensive collection. I think they even had to take parts of the panes of glass out when the agaves were finally flowering. Because, you know, they send up large flower stalks. This one, unfortunately, is not even hardy here in North Carolina, but it's wonderful. Agave attenuata. We have some variegated forms called Carastripes. I think Tony Avent sells one. But this is the straight green form, still not hardy, even in North Carolina, but still worth growing. I thought this was clever. Still up in Pennsylvania, they have these huge containers. These containers are at least 5 feet tall themselves. And then they put these agave americanas in for the summer. So those are standing at least 7 feet tall. Wonderful LA. When I was, this photo was taken probably 2 or 3 years ago, but when I was a student there, they never would have done something this extreme at Longwood Gardens. So it just goes to show you how the trends have changed in the last 10 years at least. And so everybody's really now picking up on this growing century plants as container plants or any kind of ornamental establishment. Isn't that great? I think they left them in for at least 2 years just so that people could really absorb what they look like. So this was really inspirational. I love seeing that great structure. It almost looks like it could be a statue. And of course they have the wonderful variegated forms that they grow in their little southwestern garden. They actually do have a garden outside where they grow the hardy prickly pears and a few sedums, and then they just plug these in just to give them some accents. I ventured out to the Pacific Northwest where I visited Cistus Nursery. And you know, you have that impression that, you know, you can't grow anything like this out in the Pacific Northwest because they get a lot of rain, but that's quite the contrary. They can actually do very well there. Good drainage, of course. They still have hot, humid summers sometimes, so it dries up a little bit in the summer months. And the summer nights even stay warm enough so they can grow these. This is Opuntia santorita, which I've actually killed in Kernersville. It survived one winter. It did not survive the following winter. So we actually have this growing in some containers at the garden instead. But it has that nice purple hue that comes up throughout the winter months. Actually, it really stands out in the winter. Again, more containers. They make wonderful container plants. This summer, obviously, you probably wouldn't want to grow containers of cacti in the garden because of all the rains, but you know what, we had, in 2007, we had that drought here. So this would have been a plant that everybody would have wanted 5-6 years ago. Going down to California, John and I had the privilege of visiting Lotus Land. They have a wonderful hardy cacti collection. Of course, all their agave americanas outside in huge sweeps. Has anyone been to Lotus Land? Not many of you. I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful garden. If you're in the area, there's a lot of gardens in this area that you should go and visit. But Lotus Land has been wonderful. She's a woman who passed away many, many years ago, left her land to this national trust, and now the garden is open to the public by appointment, by tours. It's a wonderful place, absolutely wonderful. They have a wonderful education center, and it's surrounded by all these upright hardy cacti.
Where?
Lotus Land, which is in California near Santa Barbara.
Thanks.
The barrel cactus do very well for them, of course, the saguaro cactus and all those other kinds of cactus, they do very well. Very eerie looking too. A friend of mine, my classmate Jonathan Wright from Longwood Gardens, did a traveling throughout different botanical gardens through Heronswood when Heronswood was still owned by Dan Hinckley. He went and visited different gardens and actually spent internships there. And he lived at that house, and he said one of the scariest things was going there at night, passing these hardy cacti that just looked like they were going to reach out and grab you. And of course, the Joshua trees that are humongous, they're at least 30 or 40 feet tall. And then Huntington Gardens, which is nearby. It's in Pasadena, not too far from Lotus Land. John and I easily spent a whole day just at Huntington Gardens. This garden in particular, with all their nice hardy cacti and succulents, that was at least 3 acres alone. Huntington is a museum and library too, so they have wonderful statuary, including this wonderful botanical garden. And then just this, John and I spent half a day just in these hardy cacti area. Wonderful blooms. This one's really nice, sweetly fragrant. We can grow these plants, but we have to bring them indoors, unfortunately. And they get very large and they get full of water, so they get really heavy, but you can trim some of the leaves down and let them reflush, and that actually will do very well as a house plant. I thought this cactus was interesting. I didn't catch the name on it. I might have it written down at home. But see the foliage? The foliage actually kind of whirls along the stems. And those, it actually might not be foliage. It might be pseudostems. But they kind of wrap around the foliage, around the stem like that. I thought that was really interesting. Well, so I did a lot of exploring of different cacti. So I wanted to make sure that when we finally grew one at Paul J. Ciener Botanical Garden, I knew what I was doing. Well, that kind of, oh, one more section, sorry. John and I had the privilege of going to visit New Zealand many, many years ago. They grow lots of hardy cacti out there. We went to the Ellerslie Flower Show that they put on, just as big as the Chelsea Flower Show. But they had these wonderful gardens that people put together. There's 2 students actually put this garden together. They must have been 18, 19 years old. They had those cacti in the back, the agave tenui, in the back, where they actually put a hose in the back of those, on the back of the plant and let the water drip down the leaves in this basin. I thought that was very clever. Very good garden for 2 boys that are fresh out of college. You all recognize the plant on the right-hand side, don't you?
Spiral aloe.
Uh-huh, the spiral aloe, Aloe polyphylla. And in New Zealand, they spiral in both directions. I was curious to know how that would work, if they would do it both directions or one direction or the other, but they're spiraling in 2 different directions. And those plants were probably a good 2 feet by 2 feet. The hardy daikias or puyas, wonderful plants out there. I know Tony sells a couple of them that are quite hardy for us, and they have these wonderful, very off-color kind of flowers there. You wouldn't expect that kind of flower on such a wonderful plant. Very vibrant, really a unique plant. And that flower head was at least 2 feet by 2 feet. It was wonderful. And we went to go visit some botanical gardens while we were down there. They had plenty of these hardy cacti in full flower or getting ready to flower for us. It was wonderful. A lot of you probably know most agaves are century plants are monocarpic, meaning they will die after flowering. So this plant probably is a good 10 to 20 years old, so they finally got it to bloom. And they will have to rely on collecting the seed after the flowers are pollinated, and they can start the plant over. Some plants will produce offshoots. You'll get some roots to come out and actually start new plants. So over time, the mother plant, when she dies, you won't even notice because you'll have all these other babies taking up its space. But the best way to get the plants to start over is by collecting those seeds. And obviously, you have to cut the flower stalk off just to get the seed off the plant. A couple of neat plants here too. This is a yucca that's in full flower. It was a wonderful plant, and it has those dark purple inflorescence at the top. And that was probably a good 15 feet tall. And then, of course, they grow some plants under glass, too. I'm glad I wasn't the only one. But wonderful cactus gardens, and they had these nice raised beds, and you can see that the gravel was good for drainage. That's really key when growing these plants. Here we are, finally. Came to visit Plant Delight's Nursery many years ago when I was a student at Longwood Gardens, and it kind of stuck. North Carolina kind of stuck to me. So I knew that when I was getting ready to graduate Longwood Gardens that I wanted to live somewhere in North Carolina. So friends of mine up at Longwood Gardens said, call Tony Avent. So sure enough, I did, and I actually got right through to Tony, and I said, Tony, I want to be your curator. He goes, okay. And he goes, well, come down for an interview. So I did. Thanksgiving weekend of 1999, so I was already prepared. And February, when I graduated, I packed my bags and never looked back. Then I'm a Southerner now, right? When I started working for Tony, he was just starting the area around the brick house where he currently lives. So those gardens were practically bare dirt when I started working there. And of course, now to see him with all these agaves blooming, it's just been fantastic to go back and see that. I thought this was a really cool shot. The fog was hitting just right with those spider webs. I thought that was really neat. I took that with my camera phone. Go figure. One of the first plants I fell in love with while working for Tony does everybody know what this one is? Mm-hmm. Yes, it's agave ovatifolia, which is the whale's tongue agave. Now this one really does not produce offshoots. It very rarely sends out a new shoot and starts a new plant. So when this thing flowers, like the one that Tony's doing this year, he will have to rely on gathering the seed and starting over. Which is okay, because you know what? We're in North Carolina where our climate is completely different from their native habitat. If you think about their native habitat, they're growing in the mountains of Mexico where it's pretty dry. They get about 10 inches of rain a year. They're growing in rock crevices, so the soil has no nutrients in it. The soils drain super well, and of course with 10 inches of rain, they might grow just a few days throughout the entire year. They have hot summer days, very cold summer nights, so they shut down again. Supposedly that's why they call them century plants, because they bloom once every century. Well, here in North Carolina, go look at Tony Avent's garden. That southwestern garden's only been open for 13 years now, and so he's already had probably a good dozen agaves already blooming for him. So our climate's completely different from their native habitat. So we can get these plants to bloom in probably 10 years. We get on average 40 inches of rain a year, although this year I think we've gotten about 60 inches of rain. And these things have been quite happy, believe it or not. Also, we have hot, humid days, hot, humid nights, and so their window of growing is actually very long, so they can grow and grow and grow. And I shall show you an example of our agave ovatifolia in a little bit. You'll be amazed at how fast that can grow. What I like also about this agave is it's got wide leaves, very blue. It's one of the bluest agaves, and it shows very little winter damage for us. So it's actually got potential to be hardy, probably even in a protected zone 6 garden. This is probably Tony's Logan Calhoun that bloomed in his Scree bed many years ago. He actually had new offshoots on it, and I think he got up on a ladder and tried to pollinate those flowers. So that was pretty interesting. I think this bloomed a year after I left. And this is the other side of it. Wonderful. I mean, his Scree beds are already 4 feet tall. And then you got this agave, which stands 5 feet tall, just the foliage, and then the flower spike comes up at least 15 feet tall. So that thing was like a tree growing in his garden. And this is his southwestern garden. I helped lay that brick patio, so it was bare dirt when I started working there in 2000. And just to see it in 13 years, what it's looked like since then. Tony does grow a lot of cacti in his garden because you know he's a plant collector. I think Will Farrell told me that he was a plant geek. A geek is a collector and a nerd wishes he was a collector or something like that. So I think Tony's a geek. Yes?
Do you grow the pots outside? Do you leave them outside in the winter?
Tony does not. He carries them in his greenhouse because he's growing a lot of agaves that are not hardy. But if you were to buy some that were hardy, you could keep them outdoors as long as they're still in full sun. Your soils drain well. You'll have no problem keeping the hardiest ones outdoors all winter long. I do at my garden. But most of Tony's that he has out here, he does carry and put them in the greenhouse. They make wonderful house plants for those who want to grow some of these more tender ones. Just bring them indoors, put them near a low light window. They'll be fine. They'll shut down for the season. You won't even have to water them. And they stay evergreen, so you don't have to worry about losing anything either. Some flowers up close. If you really get up close and personal with these flowers, they're really interesting. They have wonderful colors. I believe actually this is probably the Manfreda, which is the deciduous agave. I believe this is probably what the flower color might look like on one of the ones that I brought, the Manfreda undulata for your plant sale. It's going to have more pink in it. Some of them have like these spidery flowers where you lose the color, but the one outside has pink flowers. Just imagine this one on the one outside. So now we get to the Xeric Scree Gardens here at Paul J. Ciener Botanical Garden. They are in the middle of our parking lot. What better place to have cacti in Kernersville, but in the wonderful parking lot. We have 2 twin beds right in the middle. People love them. If you notice, the curb around the beds have been poured, and then we asked the guys to come out with their masonry trowels. I believe I have another shot of it. We asked the guys to come out with their masonry trowels and actually dig out perforations in the curb every 18 inches. They thought we were stupid. They just thought that this is the ugliest curb ever. I mean, we told them what it was going to be. It was going to be a wonderful garden. We were going to put some hens and chicks, and they just couldn't grasp that concept. They thought it was terrible. It looked like teeth. But we had an ulterior motive. We knew what we were doing. Of course, we had to deal with the heavy clay soils like some of you probably do around here. But we managed with it because these beds are quite raised. We softened that soil. We had a tiller go in there and at least loosen up some of that clay. And then we built these trenches. That's corrugated black pipe, 4 inches. And that's snaked throughout the beds so that when the water does drain, it goes into that corrugated pipe and then it goes across the driveway into that drain that you see in the upper corner. And we thought that was sufficient to allow enough water to drain. Plus we use permatil, which is that baked slate soil aggregate in these beds, and that helps the soils drain too. Permatil is great. I know you probably heard Tony talk about this. It's baked, it's unbreakable, it'll last forever, it's good for drainage, good for root penetration. We also use it in our raised beds kitchen garden, so the seedlings that we put in there every year, they have no problem growing in the permatil. And it's also being sold as a preventative from voles eating your roots. So it's a multi-purpose product. I highly recommend it. Here's the permatil. We layered permatil topsoil until we got to the desired height we wanted, and we just kept tilling and tilling and tilling and tilling to make sure that that soil works the way we wanted it to. We wanted good drainage. Now, having said that, here's how, we just tilled it in, just kept tilling in, just layer after layer after layer. We probably tilled those beds at least 10 times before we were said and done. Very little compost. If you notice, I haven't mentioned compost. Compost holds moisture. We don't want a lot of moisture in these beds, so we did probably the top 4 inches with compost, and that was it. We tilled that into the top layer, and that was it. So you can see how tall those beds are raised. That's a good 4 feet in the center there. Now, you don't have to have a 4-foot raised bed if you want to grow these hardy cacti. You just need 6 inches. If you wanted to grow hardy cacti, a minimum of 6 inches is ideal, but you do want to get those soils raised. You want to add some kind of permatil or some other soil aggregate, even though I think permatil is the best because it's unbreakable, but you want to make sure that you have some good drainage, whether that's in your containers, in your garden, around your mailbox, what have you. You want to make sure there's at least 6 inches. We used topsoil. We got topsoil from a local field. It wasn't a farmer's field, thank goodness, but we found that it worked well. So topsoil, permatil, and then just a little bit of compost in the soil. And I have some information about that in your little flyer that I handed out. So when Todd and I were there together in 2009, we started actually doing a lot of planting. We put groups together. We have some hardy cacti that you see there, some hardy succulents, some perennials, some shrubs. We just knew that there are a lot of plants that could take the good drainage, full sun, hot, hot, hot. I can't express how hot that was because that's our parking lot. Also, we just decided to experiment with some plants that don't normally grow in a Xeric Scree garden, but we wanted to give it a try. And we've actually had some great successes. If you've been there in recent years, you'll be amazed at how big these things have gotten. So we played with the plants and we fudged some things, we moved some things around. I think this is the best way to plan. Don't put it on paper ahead of time because you're going to change it up anyway. So you just play with the colors, you play with the textures. Working for Tony Avent for 8 years, drifts of one, I've learned that, you know, you play textures up against each other, foliage, flowers, everything, and that's how we did it here at the gardens as well. And we planted, we had a wonderful time doing it. It took us 2 days to get these 2 gardens planted. It was wonderful. We had that nice berberis in the center of the garden there. We do have drip tubing irrigation. That white pipe you see there is future drip tubing. We put drip tubing in all the beds. They're spanned about 2 feet apart. They have little holes, emitters every 12 inches. And those gardens probably run once a week, if that. Of course, this summer we had no rain. Although in the last month, in the summer we had plenty of rain, so we didn't have to irrigate. And then the last month we've had to turn it on maybe once or twice a week. This was our Santa Rita that we planted. It survived the first winter. It did not survive the second winter, unfortunately. But, you know, you propagate those plants from little paddles and you can actually get them to sit and root in the ground easily. And here it is with the permatil. Adding that nice permatil as a mulch really works well. Instead of mulch, we wanted this effect because one, it is a Xeric Scree garden. We wanted you to know that you were in an environment where we can grow these plants. We wanted you to think you were in the desert, if you will. If we mulch those gardens, the mulch breaks down and adds moisture. You know that. So we didn't want to really do that. We wanted to make sure that their plants had good drainage. We learned the hard way. This is Delosperma cooperi. Delosperma cooperi actually ended up a weed. So we decided not to go with cooperi. We found some other ice plants that did very well for us. We ended up moving the cooperi somewhere else. I believe this is summer of 2009. I believe in December of 2009 is when we planted the hens and chicks. And we got the hens and chicks from a nursery called Stonecrop out of Virginia. Here it is a year later. I don't know if you can notice, right here is Agave ovatifolia. I have another shot of it, but look how teeny tiny that is. That's probably a foot by a foot right now. This is Nolina here, the bear grass. Caloroy, the pink in the front. The caloroy actually swallowed the agave, so I took it out. Even though I think now the agave's grown so much, I think it would duke it out. And there's the hens and chicks along the curb. The idea behind the hens and chicks is that they'll grow, they'll touch each other, and you won't even know there's a living curb there. We actually have a group of volunteers that work in our, it sounds mean, but they work in the basement. They call themselves the trolls. They make things for the gift shop. We have a wonderful gift shop, so they actually make things in the gift shop. Once in a while, I'll see some little hens and chicks missing throughout the garden. I wonder what's going on, and I go down to the basement. And the girls have actually taken them because they made some troughs downstairs in the basement. So they actually go and take some of those hens and chicks from us, which is absolutely fine because they grow so well for us. And here's another side. There's those Delosperma cooperi. See how big they've gotten? They're taking up a lot of real estate. So we decided not to keep them in that garden. We've actually swapped them out with other plants. There's our there's our temporary office trailer here. The last time the group came to visit, this is probably what the garden looked like with that office trailer. And then our nice pavement is going in around the parking lot too. Well, the trailer's gone. Long live that trailer. We have no reason for it anymore. There's our welcome center in the back, and I believe that was under construction when you all came to visit. This is a rosemary here in the center. The rosemary does very well in that environment. If you've ever grown the herbs, lavenders, or rosemaries, they need good drainage. So I recommend putting permatil in with their holes too, and you'll have a lot of good success growing those two plants. However, that rosemary also took up a lot of real estate, so we ended up taking that out and moving it somewhere else. And I believe this is the Santa Rita the second year. So it did very well for us. Unfortunately, it did not survive the third year. The Nephofia does really well. This is toffee nose. They like good drainage. There's a Vernonia iron butterfly. I have another shot of it. This is Baptisia perfoliata. Of course, I saw that growing in Tony Avent's garden in that good soil, so I wanted to make sure I grow some of those too. The Baptisia perfoliata flowers in summer, has little yellow individual flowers that are born inside the leaf axils. The foliage has that grayish texture, and they call it perfoliata because perfoliate means it clasps, the leaves clasp around the stems. A lot of people come in, and I'm sure some of you might have done this, I know I have done this, they'll ask me, what's that eucalyptus in your garden? Because it does, it looks just like eucalyptus, but it's not, it's Baptisia. Interesting plant. It's only found, it's endangered, it's only found in 2 counties in Georgia. So we'll collect this thing and actually start them and produce more plants for the future. It's growing, the cactus gardens are growing. I told you it's that good soil, just a little bit of compost, just a little bit of moisture, and those plants have grown like gangbusters in just the 4 short years that we've had them in the garden. In 2009, after we planted some of the hardier things, John and I actually came back to visit the Ralston Arboretum and to go visit Tony. Tony allowed me to take like a paddle here, one of those stems there, just one of each of them, and I laid them flat in the garden. I scratched the surface of the garden so that I could see the soil, laid them flat, and they rooted. By the end of the summer, they rooted, and now they're 4 feet tall. One little tiny plant, one little stem, 4 feet tall already. I've got some photos of some of the upright punches or prickly pears. There's that berberis that I showed you in the beginning. This is Yucca rupicola in the front. What's really interesting about this Yucca rupicola is the first year I had it, it had 1 stem, 1 flower. We had a rainstorm come in, broke the whole thing down. I didn't know if it was going to come back. Well, of course, it came back and it multiplied over time. So it was actually a good thing that the storm came and knocked down that flower. There's the hens and chicks up close. We have 75 different kinds of hens and chicks. I told you we had 2 beds. We have 2 twin beds. So there's about 35 or so in one bed, about 40 or so in the other bed. It has done very well for us. They've all succeeded. They're blue, they're green, they're red, they're teeny tiny, they have hairs, they don't have hairs, they're smooth. They've been flowering, they've been growing, they're absolutely wonderful. They still haven't taken over the curb just yet, but they will. There's that agave ovatifolia, getting bigger. This is the gnolata, the bear grass, and then here is one of those upright prickly pears that I grew from just 1 stem, just 6 inches in 2009. Laid it on the ground, it's grown that much in 3-4 years. There's that hardy berberis again. There's another upright opuntia that I started from seed, or started from 1 stem. Here's the Manfreda chocolate chips. I have another photo of it, but I have this available at the plant sale in the back, but there it is. And that plant has grown very well. From 1 little stem, each colony now is at least 3 feet by 3 feet. What else do we have in this garden? This is pussy toes in the front, snapdragon here, the baptisia over here, more yuccas, more nolinas. I like the colors here, the pink with the snapdragon up against the berberis, and there's that Yucca rupicola the following year, multiplying. This is Amsonia hebrichtii, which does very well for us in the center of this garden. It might be taking up a little bit of space, so I might move it over time. But it does very well in that environment. Then it turns the bright yellow in the fall. Here is Opuntia shearii. Again, 1 petal in 2009, grown this much. This is Agave lophantha, which is multiplied really nicely for us. And this is our Logan Calhoun. And it's spread, there's 1 little shoot coming up right there. So it's come at least 3 feet. And then there's another one that has come up in our patch of oxalis. This is oxalis, a hardy oxalis for us in those scree beds. When I worked for Tony Avett, they were growing in mostly shade. Well, here they are in full sun. They've done very well for us. The only problem with them this year was all the heavy rains we had in the spring caused a little bit of spotting on the leaves. I cut it back. They reflushed. You don't even know they had the spotting on the leaves. So they're an excellent plant for the scree gardens. We planted about olive-sized bulbs back in spring this year. Bury them deep, like 3 inches deep, because then you won't get the flopping either. There's plenty of purple leaf shamrocks out there. Or there's the green leaf forms out there, and they love the Xeric scree gardens, and they'll flower for you most of the summer as well. Here's that Vernonia, the iron butterfly I mentioned, growing in amongst this prickly pear, this upright prickly pear. This is in full flower right now for us in front of, or behind the Baptisia perfoliata. So let's talk a little bit closely about some of our plants that we have in the garden. This is Agave ovatifolia again. This is out of focus, but see that little teeny tiny plant? That's 2009. Here it is, 4 feet by 4 feet in 2013. When we purchased plants for this garden, actually Todd did this before I started working there. He purchased plants from Tony Avent in 2007. So we bought that Agave ovida as a 1 quart size plant. You all know this. You buy plants from Tony. You know how small the plants are. But in 2009 we actually put that plant in a 1 gallon size plant. So it grew about 6 inches by 6 inches in a 1 gallon. We put that 1 gallon plant in 2009. It's now 4 feet by 4 feet. I swear, I haven't blinked, but I haven't seen this plant grow so massively. I just don't know what happened. It just blew up. A lot of times when we give tours, one of my coworkers says our plants are like on steroids, and so I clarify, I'm like, we don't actually feed our plants steroids. Because she explains that this one is like a century plant on steroids. When Tony came to visit me in spring of this year, I asked him, did you look at our Agave ovida? He said, yes. I said, how many years do you think it'll be before it flowers? And he said, about 2 years. John went in there to look, and the center of it is getting kind of beefy, and pardon me for using this term, but it looks pregnant in the middle. And actually, Tony used that term once, so don't blame me, blame him. But this plant does have a nice swollen center, so that I know that flower bud is coming. This plant is planted in the very first scree bed you pull into when you come into the garden. When you pull in my driveway of the garden, you have the building on one side, you have another building across the street on the other side. So in that driveway, we get the heaviest winter winds. That agave is in the flow of the heaviest winter winds, suffers no damage whatsoever. The only thing that does suffer is vandalism. We've actually had somebody go and take a slice off one of the leaves. It was probably someone wanting to see if they can get the plant to root. Who knows what they were thinking. We have this wonderful lycoris, hill beyond hill, right in front of it. I'm very proud of this plant. In case you haven't been able to tell, I'm very proud of it. The only unfortunate thing, I think I'll cry when it does flower, because then I know it's the end of its life. These orostachys have been wonderful for us. Does anybody grow orostachys? Couple of you, they're wonderful. They have this nice arrangement of foliage that kind of spirals around the stem, and the stem comes up. And when the stem comes up and it sends out flowers, the foliage spirals around the entire stem. Tony has a couple of these growing in his garden. But you can see they multiply really fast, and they keep that red color throughout the entire year.